So welcome to the Deliverance and Demonology workshop as we continue our tour of the yoga pose repertory and how it reveals and expresses Hindu spirituality. In this workshop, we will be examining passive poses. Passive poses are the most ancient in the yoga pose repertory. These are the original or primary poses. For about 2,000 years, there were no active poses in yoga, so there was no exercise, and that might come as a surprise. But the earliest yoga philosophy texts, the primary Upanishads, which were written between 600 and 400 BC, discuss meditation, not posture. Later texts prescribe postures for meditation, but only in a general way. For example, the Brahma Sutras, and these were written between 200 BC and 200 AD, instruct the meditator to take a seated position, but they do not specify what kind of position. The general assumption at that time was that movement distracts the mind and renders it unable to examine subtle matters. So another early yoga philosophy treatise, this is the Yoga Sutras, and that was written around 250 AD, likewise prescribes passive postures in a general way, and it identifies as suitable any fixed and comfortable position in which the practitioner can remain still for a long period of time in order to meditate. Here's a quote. Motionless and agreeable form of staying is asana. Asana means yogic posture, and that's from chapter 2, verse 46 of the Yoga Sutras. So, any easy-to-hold, stationary posture was considered acceptable because in it, the practitioner could best attain this relaxation of effort, which would allow him or her to meditate on the infinite. So no yogi would have considered any physically challenging posture or movement conducive to meditation on the infinite, at least not at this point in history. So only passive poses were presented as a stable base for losing your mind. And there were no acrobatic poses. So we did not have standing poses, did not have hand balances, did not have inversions, those are the upside down poses, and we did not have contortions at this time. About 1,000 years after the Yoga Sutras, active poses began to appear in yoga manuals. So this was around the 13th to the 14th centuries. This is during our medieval period. The active pose repertory was really minimal at first, and then it kind of expanded gradually over the centuries, and then more substantially from the 17th through the 19th centuries. And then it really exploded in the 20th century because modern yoga gurus started experimenting with the yoga posture system. They combined it with other movement systems, including Indian wrestling and European gymnastics. But even after these active poses were introduced, they were still regarded as preparatory to seated meditation and subordinate to it. So the active poses were designed to facilitate seated meditation, and this is the culmination and crux of yoga practice. Active poses were not treated as a stand-alone exercise regimen or a moving meditation. That came later, much later. So that's the history, and that's kind of in it, putting the passive poses in perspective with the active poses. Now, let's discuss passive poses. These are not just seated meditation positions. They are actually physical philosophy. They embody and express core doctrines of yoga philosophy concerning the nature of reality and existence. And this philosophy is conveyed through the body language of the meditator. And you can intuitively apprehend what it means just by analyzing the symbolism in a meditation pose. And we're going to do that in a moment. So passive poses symbolize the Hindu supreme reality. They mime the message of non-dualism or monism, and they are practical applications of non-dualism or monism. Now, those are technical terms. So what do they mean? Non-dualism literally means not two, only one. And the one refers to a metaphysical concept of a single universal being or unitive reality. Monism is really simple. And similar, it asserts that reality or existence can be reduced to one single substance or principle of being. So those are very similar concepts. Passive poses then are an ancient means of eliciting a spiritual experience of transcendence and detachment from embodied existence in order to discover and merge with this one universal being. So passive poses are subtly religious. Their physical form suggests a transcendent state of consciousness and is designed to induce that state. And the state of mind that is associated with these passive poses is generally understood to represent Eastern mysticism and a state of mind that is no mind. No mind. That would be technically the cessation of mental fluctuations. So like a mental flatline, as you see right there. And this is described as tranquility in the Yoga Sutras. So I quote, "Yoga is the suppression of the modifications of the mind." And that's from chapter 1, verse 2. Here's another quote. "Exertion to acquire a tranquil state of mind devoid of fluctuations is called practice." That's chapter 1, verse 13. So in these passive meditation poses, the body is all neatly folded up. It's all contained and constrained, like that figure that you see of the human being jammed inside the box. So why is this? Why is this? It's to minimize physical distractions within the body and also outside the body, and to eliminate the body and the world as operative factors in human experience. In their compact, enclosed, and inert form, meditation poses aid in disengaging and disassociating from the body and its sensations, the mind and its thoughts and feelings, the will and its self-determination, and then ultimately the sense of I. This is the sense of a unique personhood, the sense of individual identity. So the goal of meditation poses is to transcend the self and transcend the world and dissolve into this boundless being of cosmic consciousness, which is the Hindu supreme reality. Passive poses are designed to foster progressively deeper levels of meditation, as you see there with the Buddha. And this shifts the experience of the meditator from a self-other and subject-object awareness to a state of no self and no other, no subject and no object. This is a nameless, formless, undifferentiated, oceanic, universal state of Am. And this is the God of Hinduism, and it's the God of yoga. So this is a God beyond all attributes and names. Meditation poses signify and facilitate this non-personal state of being, and in doing so, they honor cosmic being. Now we're going to take, for example, the lotus pose that you see right there, pictured in that sculpture. This is a classic meditation pose. I mean, you see this in statuary at Asian gardens, in Asian restaurants. You see it in acupuncture clinics. You see it in New Age shops. I've even seen it recently on billboard advertisements for cannabis products. Have you noticed that? I've seen a few in Norfolk. Well, this pose is supposed to be associated with relaxation and health, but that is a total misunderstanding. Lotus, in any case, is this quintessential meditation pose. And as you can see in it, the practitioner is seated in a wide-lapped position and is immobilized by being bound into a human knot. Now let me show you a lady who is demonstrating this. This is the classic version of lotus. And she's literally bound in a human knot. So you see there that her legs are folded and crossed into a pretzel shape on her lap. Each foot is propped up on the opposite thigh. You have the arms wrapped behind the back. And then you have each hand grabbing hold of the opposite big toe. So she's like literally in a straitjacket. She has turned herself into a straitjacket. There is another alternative for the hand position, and it's this. This practitioner has her hands resting on her thighs, and her hands are forming what is called a mudra. This is an esoteric sign that signifies the wisdom of the East, and that also supposedly channels subtle energy in the body. Now, we can do a close-up on that. Kind of looks like the Western A-OK sign, right? All right, now, in terms of the eyes, the practitioner's eyes can be closed shut, as you see in that statue right there with Shiva, or they can be focused on the tip of the nose, which means that the eyes are going to be crossed, like this lady is demonstrating, or they could be focused on a point between the eyebrows, and this is called the third eye. It is a psychic meditation point. It's a chakra, it's an energy center in Hinduism. So the eyes are rolled back and they kind of look like hard-boiled eggs there. Yep. So now, if you were to see someone in that position, or like so, what message does this body language convey? Is this person open to communication, having a conversation with you? No. Person is incommunicado. Right? So physically, the meditator's body is straitjacketed. It's put out of commission. It's indisposed. The meditator is no longer a doer, an actor, an initiator, or a responder in life. The power of the body to effect change in the world has been quashed. And this signifies transcendence of the body and embodied existence. You see the symbolism there? Also, psychologically, the meditator is going to be withdrawn, interiorized, and detached, maybe even absent. The eyes that express the soul are turned inward, and the soul has receded out of reach. So this signifies transcendence of the self or personhood. And socially, of course, we've mentioned that all interaction has ceased, so relationship has also ceased. And by withdrawing, the meditator has simultaneously declared your absence, because you are as good as non-existent to him, right? Your existence is dependent on his existence, and since he has disappeared, you have disappeared. That's kind of what the body language declares. So the body language of passive poses is non-personal. It's non-relational. It's the body language of no self and no other, no subject and no object. It mimes the message of non-dualism or oneness, not two, only one. So according to yoga philosophy, there's only one being in existence in the universe, and that being is God. God is the only being in existence. God alone exists. That's their core doctrine. You and I and the multiplicity of individual beings do not exist, or we are transient enough not to matter. We are illusory. So everything is subsumed into this one metaphysical reality. And that one has been variously referred to as cosmic being, cosmic consciousness, universal spirit, oversoul, self with a capital S. Also Brahman, the Hindus call it Brahman, and in Sanskrit it's known as Sat Chit Ananda, which means being, consciousness, bliss. So the body language of meditation poses is a nonverbal shorthand for becoming bodiless and mindless and melting into yoga and Hinduism's highest god, which is Brahman. These passive poses embody and enact the core doctrine that is articulated in one of the most ancient texts, which is the Chandogya Upanishad. This was written sometime between 600 and 500 BC, okay, before Christ. And you can encapsulate all of yoga philosophy into this one statement. It's Tat Tvam Asi, which means that you are, or you are that. And it's referring to cosmic being or cosmic consciousness. The human you is only a mental construct. The real you is that universal existence or intelligence. Let me quote to you. In the beginning, dear boy, this world was being with a capital B. One only without a second. And that, again, that's from the Chandogya Upanishad. They divide their texts by chapter, section, verse. So it's 6.2.1 and 2. That which is the finest essence, the whole universe has that as its soul. That is reality, that is the self, and that is you. 6.9.4. Now we're going to take a look at a sample list of passive meditation poses from some widely published and distributed yoga manuals from the 15th through the 18th centuries. This includes the Shiva Samhita, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and the Garanda Samhita. And you're going to see that these passive poses are a platform for meditation that facilitates transcendence and union with this infinite. So here we go. We've already seen the lotus pose. This is called Padmasana. And the only thing I want to point out here is that this man is a very famous modern yoga guru. His name is Pattabhi Jois. And he was the founder of Ashtanga Yoga. This is the most acrobatic and athletic form of yoga, and there were lots of spin-offs in the West, including power yoga and flow yoga, and I was really into power yoga when I did this, and that's how I got demonized. So he's the guru of Ashtanga or power yoga. All right, next pose. This is called Adept Pose or Siddhasana, and this is another famous modern yoga guru, B.K.S. Iyengar. He wrote a book called Light on Yoga in the 1960s, and this is considered the Bible of modern yoga. It's got a lot of postures in it. All right, this is Auspicious Pose or Svastikasana, and another famous modern yoga guru named Shivananda. My one comment about him is he looks very emaciated, and he also looks very empty. You can tell he's been meditating on emptiness a long time. He's pretty vacant. Here we have him also demonstrating Thunderbolt pose, which is Vajrasana in Sanskrit. Again, that's Shivananda. And then here we have another meditation pose. This is called Difficult or Contracted Pose, Sankatasana. I'm actually more interested in the lower half. The lower half is what is described in these more ancient manuals. And this man is also a famous modern yoga guru, Krishnamacharya. He was actually a guru to two of the others that we just looked at. He's considered the grandfather of modern yoga. All right, this lady here is demonstrating hero pose or virasana. Again, all of these are positions in which the ancient yogis would have meditated. This pose is called Bharadvahasana, and it's named after a sage, so there's no nice English translation. And let me point out this thing. This is interesting. It's a combination pose. It's actually 2 in 1. So one of his legs is performing lotus pose. The other leg is performing hero pose. So that pose is half lotus, half hero. Do you need to relocate so you can see better? Okay, yeah, come up here, Adele. All right, and then this is lion pose, Simhasana. My comment on this one is that my feet would go numb after not too long. I don't know how that could be a good meditation pose. This is called Gracious Pose or Bhadrasana. Okay. This one is Bound Angle Pose or Baddha Konasana. One comment in, if you are into Western sports, you would recognize that as a modern sports stretch. Cobbler's pose or butterfly pose, it's designed to stretch the inner thighs. Now, the yogis did not use that as a stretch pose. They were not thinking about sports. This was a meditation pose to them, okay? But I just wanted to point out the similarity. And then here we have another one. This is called Intense West Stretch or Paschimottanasana. And again, it looks like a runner's double hamstring stretch, right? Or runner's spinal extensor stretch, stretches the back of the thighs and the back. But again, the yogis would have done that to meditate. All right, and then finally we have Great Energy Seal or Mahamudra. This looks a lot like a hurdler stretch. So there you go, some sample poses from the early yoga manuals. Stable platform for losing your mind. All right, now, only a real life story can convey the gravity of these passive poses, and so I want to share that with you. You're going to get a sense of what they really mean. This was a book entitled Death of a Guru. It was told by Rabi Maharaj, but it was actually written by David Hunt. And Rabi was a devout Hindu from Trinidad. He was born into the highest caste in the Hindu system, which is the priestly caste, the Brahmin caste. And he later converted to Christ. But he shares in this book his regrets about his father, his deepest sense of loss over his father. And again, this title is Death of a Guru. His father's name was Chandraban Maharaj, and he became a renunciant shortly after marrying Rabi's mother and fathering Rabi through a traditional arranged marriage. So after that, he took a religious vow of celibacy, which is called brahmacharya, in order to be established in divine consciousness. And then his lifestyle changed abruptly. He became the ultimate exemplar of yoga. He spoke not a word. He was fixed in the lotus position. He passed his time just in meditation and in reading the sacred Hindu scriptures, nothing else. And then meanwhile, his hair and his beard grew down to his waist. Well, the man's interiorization had a very profound impact on his family and the community. So I want to quote to you from the book. So completely had he turned within to realize the true self that he never acknowledged any human presence, although admirers came from miles around to worship him and to lay before him their offerings of fruit and flowers, cotton cloth and money. No one ever aroused a response from him. He seemed to be in another world. So this absenteeism of soul was a form of constructive desertion that psychologically negated Rabi as a son and also as a person. Quote, "Not once did he ever speak to me or pay me the slightest heed. For 8 long years he uttered not a word, but continued in a trance-like state which he had achieved through yoga." Now later on, Rabi began to admire his father and emulate his father, but this is what he said after he had gained perspective and come to Christ. He said, "Just 2 words from him would have made me unspeakably happy. More than anything else in the whole world, I wanted to hear him say, 'Rabi, son,' just once," but he never did. And here's the back cover. I don't know if you can see that photograph of his face. It's a little bit dark, but that is Rabi Maharaj. So gazing into his father's vacant eyes, he felt himself plummeting into an abyss. I quote, "I became lost in their fathomless depths. It was like falling through space, reaching out to grab something, calling for someone, but meeting only silence and emptiness." Now, his father's detachment was so complete that he almost became catatonic. And he was like these little statuettes of Hindu deities on the family altar. The family would gingerly unwrap them from cloth, undress them, bathe them, dress them again, and wrap them in cloth again. This was their kind of like puja or worship ritual. And here's what he said. "It was like that with my father too. Like the gods in the prayer room, he did nothing physically for himself. He was a god to be taken care of, washed and fed and changed for 8 years." Well, Rabi's mother became a virtual widow. She was nursing this shell of a human being who had slipped into a spiritual coma and become physically disabled and mentally incapacitated, basically a dead weight of humanity. When the bewildered toddler Rabi asked his mother, "Why is father that way?" his mother explained that his father was someone very special, the greatest man you could have for a father. Indeed, the community elevated Chandraban to the status of an avatar, and that is an incarnation of a Hindu deity. I quote, "With awe and respect, religious Hindus spoke of him as one who had the courage and conviction to tread higher and mysterious paths. In the opinion of many, including the greatest pundit I ever knew, father was an avatar." Again, an incarnation of a Hindu deity. Well, this state of affairs continued until a secular-minded male relative who regarded Chandraban's disconnect from life as psychological nonsense that was perpetuated by all this public adulation had him taken by ambulance to a sanitarium where he died a mysterious death. And this is how he died. The nurse, under doctor's order, cut his hair and he keeled over. And he was in perfect health. So there was no medical explanation for that. Okay, so Chandraban's spirit had taken flight because his body was useless and life was pointless to this disinterested occupant. So we see in this story the outworking of yogic meditation in its fullest degree. This is what the meditation poses really represent: death of the self, and by extension, death of others. Okay, I want to summarize for you major tenets of yoga philosophy, and I want to contrast them with Judeo-Christian doctrine. By the way, that is a depiction of the goddess Maya, and Maya means illusion in Hinduism, and it refers to this world as we know it. They say everything is illusory, everything is Maya. So yoga philosophy, the world is an illusion or Maya, or it's transient enough to be of no consequence. Judeo-Christian doctrine, the world is real. It's God's creation. God made creation as a home for mankind. God esteemed creation as good. Yoga philosophy. Embodied personal existence is an illusion, or transient enough to be of no consequence. Judeo-Christian doctrine. Embodied personal existence is real and valuable. Human beings are God's greatest work. God esteemed humanity as very good. We are of utmost significance since we bear God's image and are capable of relationship with Him and are capable of reflecting Him and representing Him. Yoga philosophy. The nature of embodied existence is suffering because of our attachment to the illusion of creation. Judeo-Christian doctrine. The nature of embodied existence is both suffering and delight because we live in a spiritual war zone, the clash of the kingdoms, clash of the kingdom of light against the clash of the kingdom of darkness. So God is maker and possessor of heaven and earth, but Satan is the ruler of this world system. God gave humanity authority over the earth to steward it, but unredeemed humanity ceded that authority to Satan. Redeemed humanity has regained that authority in Christ. So our experience on earth is a mixture of heaven and hell, wouldn't you say? Because it's a mixture of good and evil forces, right and wrong choices. Yoga philosophy. The cause of suffering is personhood. Just because you exist. Just because you are you. You are the sufferer. If you didn't exist, you wouldn't suffer. So they consider this a delusional sense of self. Judeo-Christian doctrine, the cause of suffering is sin or choosing evil, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Yoga philosophy. The soul is repeatedly born into a new body, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, to suffer. This is the doctrine of reincarnation or samsara. Judeo-Christian doctrine, the soul is born once, and after that one lifetime is judged for deeds done in the body. Few more. Yoga philosophy, the nature of the universe is one indivisible conscious being. So what you have there is the collapse between creator and creation. There's no distinction. Creator and creation are identical. They're one and the same in yoga philosophy. In fact, the Hindus say that creation is God with form, but the creator is God without form. Right? Contrasting that, Judeo-Christian doctrine, the nature of the universe is God's workmanship. It is a product of God's genius. It is not Him, nor is it an extension of Him. The universe is not God, and God is not the universe. God is separate and distinct from His creation, just as human beings are separate from their creative works. Yoga philosophy. The remedy for suffering is to obliterate the sense of I, this sense of individual identity, personal being, your personality. Obliterate it. That's how you get free from suffering. Judeo-Christian doctrine. The remedy for suffering is to accept God's redemption plan to ransom us back from evil, basically from Satan and from our own evil tendencies. Okay, so you can see that, looks like I may have missed one. Yoga is a nihilistic practice. It conceives of the world as unreal or illusory. Now, let me give you an example. There's a yoga manual called the Shiva Samhita, and this was from about the 15th century, so we're talking about 1400s. It describes the world as a figment of one's imagination, and the actual substance is supposedly pure consciousness. Now, what do they mean by pure consciousness? This is basically consciousness with nothing to be conscious of. So consciousness with nothing in view. You look in a viewfinder, there's nothing in the viewfinder. It's like a blank screen with no content. That's what they mean by that. All this world, animate and inanimate, has arisen from consciousness. To the extent that the world exists, it is imagined. As something non-existent, it consists of consciousness. And that's chapter 1, verse 80 of the Shiva Samhita, and I'm reading from the James Mallinson translation. Another quote, "All this world, animate and inanimate, has arisen from consciousness, so one should abandon the world completely and take refuge in consciousness." Chapter 1, verse 50. Now, because the world is regarded as unreal and illusory, investing in life is pointless. Can you see the logic of that? The logic of yoga demands the rejection of your life in this world. And this would require radical abnegation, either in deed or maybe in your heart attitude. So you either shun relationships and work, or you psychologically detach from them. You shun aspirations for the fulfillment of personal desires, for love and life purpose, or you psychologically disconnect from them. Here is a quote that indicates that. "The yogi must abandon company." Think about that rishi there. "He has to do it completely and utterly, otherwise he will not get liberation." This is again from the Shiva Samhita, chapter 5, verses 226 and 227. So let's apply this. This rishi behind me, his name is Vishvamitra. He is pictured there either with his consort or wife. In Hinduism, it's never clear whether they're actually, a consort or a wife. But he would have to shun her, renounce her. That would be a little bit difficult, don't you think? He must renounce action, being scornful of the rewards. Chapter 1, verse 30. Now, not all yoga practitioners go so far as to renounce relationships and work, especially not Westerners, and especially not Indian householder yogis. But renunciation is built into the practice of meditation itself. Meditation is renunciation. It is antisocial, anti-work, anti-intellectual, anti-emotional, anti-volitional, and anti-personal. That is certain. However, if you have explored exercise science or the medical health field, you'll find that it is being pawned off as a de-stress and relaxation therapy. And even in psychiatric hospitals, it is pawned off as a positive behavioral intervention strategy. So this is serious stuff. All right, we're going to consider a statement from another yoga manual. This is the Garanda Samhita, and it was written between the 17th and 18th century. So let me point out there we have the same rishi, Vishvamitra, and now he has fathered a child, but look what he's doing. He's renouncing. Convenient for him, I suppose. So he's renouncing his wife and child. After becoming disinterested in one's body, one's children, one's wife, one's relatives, one's friends, riches, and everything else, one can attain samadhi. And samadhi is this trance-like state of meditative absorption and union with, quote, the supreme spirit pervading the universe. And this is described as the bliss of absolute nothingness. This is a quote from the Garanda Samhita, chapter 7, verse 21, James Mallinson translation. So yoga is the art of self-expungement by incremental degrees. You erase yourself gradually. Imagine a drawing of your portrait, and you're erasing yourself. All of yoga is directed at this tranquil state of mind devoid of fluctuations, which is that mental flat line that we talked about earlier. Now, this sounds kind of therapeutic. You know, our world is really hectic, and sometimes we feel really frenetic. But tranquility in the yogic sense is this. It's akin to that final state of rest that we find in cemeteries. Rest in peace, the peace of extinction, the peace of absence. So this tranquility is the quelling or killing of all desire for objects seen. Not only the common desires, you know, for companionship and success, but in the Hindu system, even extraordinary desires. Some people have a desire for paranormal powers or for celestial experiences. They want to go to other lokas, other planes or realms of existence. All of that is considered illusion. So yogic tranquility is utter desirelessness and detachment. And this is the desirelessness and detachment of the entombed. Now, in contrast, let's get to something positive here. Judaism and Christianity posit desire as positive, right? Especially when it's directed toward God or rightly related to God. So, for example, the desire of our soul is for your name and remembrance of you. Isaiah chapter 26, verse 8. One thing have I desired of the Lord, and that do I seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. That's Psalm 27, verse 4. So the Bible indicates that the root of all desire is to be like God, and that mankind's greatest desire is God. I shall be satisfied when I awake in your likeness. That's Psalm 17, verse 15. The Psalms in particular bless the fulfillment of sanctified desire. Here are some examples. May the Lord grant you according to your heart's desire and fulfill all your purpose. Amen. Psalm 20, verse 4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. That's Psalm 37, verse 4. So it's good, it's right, it's proper to desire life, to desire length of days, to see good. That's Psalm 34, verse 12. And fulfilled desire is a tree of life. Proverbs 13, verse 12. More significant even than the affirmation of human desire is the affirmation of God's desire. So unlike Hinduism, whose highest God is impersonal and alien to desire, the God of the Bible entertains desire, and this is an indelible mark of personhood. God desires his people. He desires truth in the inward parts. He desires mercy and not sacrifice, and so on. So listen to this. In yoga, desirelessness is desired. You can't get away from desire. Desirelessness is desired. That's a contradiction. And that's because the mind is at rest, the rest in peace rest that I talked about, the peace of extinction. Okay, we're going to talk about yogic meditation. There are lots of different ways to meditate. They seem to be proliferating all the time, but you can basically reduce them to two different methods, meditating on form or meditating on the formless. There's also an intermediate or transitional kind where you're meditating on a kind of formless form, maybe a discrete form of light. So take a look at that image right there. Just to give you an example, if you were meditating on the mannequin head, that would be meditating on form. If you were focusing or meditating on the black backdrop, that would be meditating on the formless. And if you were focusing or meditating on those wispy vapors there, or the smoke, the swirling smoke, that would be a transitional kind. You'd be meditating on formless form. Does that make sense? So in yoga, the usual progression in meditation is going from form to formlessness. Meditating on form is preparatory to and easier than meditating on the formless. Meditating on form requires only partial emptying of the mind, whereas meditating on the formless requires full draining of the brain. Focusing on one thing, though, prepares the person to focus on no thing or nothing. Now, let me share with you my thoughts about a very widespread misconception, because even I heard another Christian counselor say that yogic meditation is a form of mindfulness or concentration, and I want to refute that. There's this misconception that this single focus or one-pointed meditation develops the power of concentration. And that's the ability to fix your attention on one thing for an extended period of time. And that's a useful skill to have. Concentration is a useful skill to have. But that is not what one-pointed meditation is. One-pointed meditation is not so much a concentration exercise as an abdication exercise. Meditating on one thing is not so much the practice of sticking to that one thing as severing many things. So it's an exclusionary attention exercise, and it involves repeatedly relinquishing or dismissing everything but the designated object. You have to even dismiss your sense of self-awareness. Right now, you are aware of yourself as an object. You're in your own field of awareness. You would have to even dismiss that. So this one-pointed meditation develops the skill and the power of negation. It's the repeated act of releasing whatever arises that is not the assigned object of meditation. By contrast, we're going to contrast that with true concentration. True concentration involves dynamic engagement with an object of focus. Like right now, some of you have dynamic engagement with me as an object of focus, but this can change. It's not static. It's actually a fluid engagement. It's not a static fixation. Also, when you are engaged as an observer, you don't lose your sense of self. Okay? You don't, that sense of being an observer is not eradicated. That's concentration. But this is abdication. This is different. The goal of one-pointed meditation is not concentration, but non-attachment. Quote, "Free from all attachment, the yogi should take refuge in the seed in which all things vanish." And that's Shiva Samhita, chapter 5, verse 215, again, the Mallinson translation. So this single connection is the last stop to no connection. Form is a flipboard into formlessness. It's a springboard into the void. Meditation on form is actually provisional. It's tactical. It's like walking off a cliff into air or walking off a gangplank into the sea. The traction that you gain by treading on a firm surface, which would be focus on a object, is used to step into space or into the boundless deep of this metaphysical sleep or death. So, let's continue here. In modern yoga practice, almost any form can serve as an object of meditation, but there are some common examples. The breath is one of them, and what I mean by that is not your natural breathing. That sounds delightful, but it's not that. It's breath control or breath regulation. And in yoga, this is the art of self-asphyxiation. And I'll be getting into that in the next workshop. You can also focus on a candle flame, a mandala. This is an abstract geometric design that symbolizes the universe, that metaphysical one. They focus on a sacred work of art, a painting, a statue of a deity. Sometimes they focus on a mantra. Remember Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Transcendental Meditation, frequently he assigned mantras to his devotees, and this is what they would meditate on. Well, many Hindu and New Age practitioners focus on the form of their guru. Typically, it's a photograph of the face of the guru, and they can have kind of a surreal experience by doing that. Or they will focus on their favorite Hindu deity, and it's usually in the form of a painting or a statue. Now, in secular yoga classes like gym yoga, meditating on form usually consists of paying undivided attention to some physical aspect of the practice, either the pose itself or, as this lady is demonstrating, something called drishti, which is a focal point. It's a fixed point where you put your attention. So she is focusing on her hand signal right there, this mudra. This is an esoteric sign. It supposedly channels subtle energy. You can also focus on muscle locks. These are isometric contractions and all kinds of things, breathing exercises, as I mentioned. So concentrating on the physical aspects of yoga harnesses the mind and trains it not to wander. And this is actually very unnatural because the mind is very exploratory. It's like a little kid in an exploratorium. The mind naturally wanders. That's how we're designed. But this is a skill of tethering the mind to one thing to prepare it to go into nothing. All right, and so we're going to talk now about meditating on the formless. We just talked about meditating on form. Now we're going to talk about meditating on the formless. One of the yoga manuals says, perish the mind. That's the objective. So meditating on the formless is acknowledged as being very difficult. Why? Because it totally opposes our experience of self, of embodied existence, of this world as we know it. The Garanda Samhita admits that it is even hard for the gods to attain. We're talking about the Hindu gods. This is spectacular. The Hindu gods are like humans. They too are burdened by limitations. They suffer adversities. They have expiration dates. My question is, why would anybody meditate or even be devoted to a god like that? So the Hindu gods in the Hindu pantheon, they're actually kind of like us. They're desiring to merge with this greater cosmic consciousness. So meditating on the formless is esteemed as superior to meditating on form because the supreme reality is formless. We're going to explore this a little bit from a yoga manual called the Shiva Samhita. This instructs the yoga practitioner to make the mind freestanding. In other words, not to think of anything. Well, how do you do that? You do that by restraining your senses from all sense objects so that you wind up existing as if in a deep sleep, free from all attachment. This is from the Shiva Samhita, chapter 5, verse 219. Now, let me say something. The denial of sense objects is going to impact the perceiver in a very profound way. And this is because awareness of an object, like I'm aware of you all right now, necessarily involves awareness of a subject. If I'm aware of you as two others, I'm also aware of myself. By rejecting objects, the meditator also rejects himself. Think about this. If you reject all objects, then you are also rejecting yourself as a perceiver of objects, yourself as a manipulator of objects, and you are rejecting yourself as an object of your own awareness. So expunging the object necessarily expunges the subject. These two arise together and they subside together. They're mutually dependent on one another. They're interdependent. So if you destroy one, you're going to destroy the other. Quote, the yogi should abandon the pair I and that and meditate on that which is undivided. Shiva Samhita, chapter 5, verse 214. So this, again, will facilitate this non-dual state. This is the state of no subject, no object, no self, no other. This is a state of formlessness and emptiness. And in this state, the meditator is oblivious to the world, to himself, because there is no I. When the yogi sits in Padmasana, that's lotus pose, and looks at the tip of his nose, his mind dies and he successfully becomes an ethereal being. Chapter 5, verse 68. I know. Can you believe it? I used to do this in my 20s. In my early 20s, I was involved in this. Loss of the sense of self during meditation is meant to spill over into everyday life. So you begin with this limited period of time where you sit and you focus on nothing, but it's supposed to be expanded throughout the day. So you start with meditating on emptiness for a limited period of time, and then you're supposed to do it for all time. So if the yogi meditates on emptiness day and night while standing still, moving, sleeping, eating, he becomes ethereal and is absorbed in the ether of consciousness. Shiva Samhita, chapter 5, verse 65. Now, I'm going to read to you some instructions on formless meditation, and you can really see how much this is really centered on the void, on emptying oneself. This is from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. This was written in the 15th and 16th centuries. And by the way, this is a Zen Buddhist meditator, I can tell. Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism. Their form of meditation is similar but different. Okay, but so this applies also to Buddhism. But I just wanted to point out that this is definitely not a Hindu meditator. I can just tell. I spent about a year in Japan. Here are your instructions. Make the mind supportless. Don't think of anything. Be just like a pot. Space outside, space inside. And this is from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. All these are going to be from chapter 4. That's verse 50. I'm reading to you from Brian Acker's translation. Don't think of external things and don't think of internal things. Abandon all thoughts. Then don't think of anything. This is chapter 4 again, verse 57. Center the self in space and space in the self. Make everything space. Verse 55. Empty within, empty without. Empty like a pot in space. Full within, full without. Full like a pot in the ocean. Verse 56. The yogi in samadhi knows neither smell, nor taste, nor form, nor touch, nor sound, nor himself, nor others. That's verse 109. As camphor in fire, like salt in water, so the mind immersed in reality dissolves. That's verse 59. The yogi who is completely released from all states and free of all thoughts remains as if dead. He is liberated. Verse 107. Well, I guess you can see by now that yoga is a dress rehearsal for death. Death of the breath, death of the mind, death of the self, death of the person you now are, death of the person you would become if you were reincarnated according to yoga eschatology. There's a translator of the Garanda Samhita. His name is Chandravasu, and he lived from 1861 to 1918. He describes this state, this spiritual state of samadhi that these meditators attain, as trance or ecstasy. And I want to tell you that samadhi is definitely a spiritual state. The question is, what kind of spirit are we talking about? And because the practice of yoga is essentially the systematic erasure of personal identity and abandonment of embodied existence, it stands to reason that yoga attracts a spirit of nihilism or death. Jesus pointed this out. He said, wherever the carcass or the dead body is, there the vultures gather. Matthew chapter 24, 28. So if you treat yourself like a dead person, guess what you're going to attract? Now, not a few yogis have died prematurely under mysterious circumstances, according to science journalist, yogi, and senior writer at the New York Times, William Broad. And he wrote a book that I read. It was a very good book. I'm surprised at how fair-minded he was being a yoga practitioner. Two of the more famous yogis who died prematurely were early promoters of yoga in the West. Now, here's one. His name was Vivekananda, and he lived from 1863 to 1902. He died at age 39 during yogic meditation in fulfillment of his own prophecy that he would not live past age 40. And this other one is Yogananda. This is actually kind of an early photograph of him. He lived from 1893 to 1952. He died at age 59 while delivering a banquet speech after hinting about his imminent departure. Now, I read his autobiography of a yogi when I was a young person, and that really got me off track. It totally tantalized me. There were a lot of Hindu paranormal accounts in there, and so I got off got off the deep end on that. According to a witness, Yogananda looked up toward his third eye chakra, kind of like he's doing a little bit right there in that photograph. This is a major focal point for meditation in the yoga classics. That's that psychic energy center. He looked up there, and then he slumped to the floor after reading the last few lines of a poem eulogizing India as the land where men dream God and the poet is hallowed for having touched that sod. This is a message that basically inspired pilgrimages to India as another holy land. Well, Vivekananda is thought to have died of a ruptured blood vessel. That's a conjecture. And Yogananda is thought to have died of a heart attack. That is also a conjecture. I would want to say this: if they did, these natural causes would not preclude the operation of spiritual forces, and especially a spirit of death. A spirit of death would be attracted to this practice of self-annihilation. The context of their deaths, their yogic predictions, their yogic posture in death, and the spiritual message that they were delivering in death indicates more than natural forces that were at work. It indicates that spiritual forces were at work. And I would explain their deaths as the culmination of a practiced preference for the non-personal and one too many dress rehearsals with death. That's my summation. So let's now talk about the biblical view of God as the great I am, in contrast to this yogic idea of God as am. So we mentioned that yoga philosophy points to this nameless, formless God that is an impersonal am state of being throughout the universe. Well, this implicitly negates the biblical revelation of God as a person who revealed himself to Moses as the great I am. His name, I am, centers on I. I. This emphasizes the reality of individual subjective experience and the profound worth of personal identity. This is a reality and a worth that God conferred on us when he made us in his image. And he made us basically to share uniqueness of being and personal autonomy. By contrast, yoga philosophy promotes spiritual suicide, as we saw. Yogic meditation signals the end of the person as a thinker, feeler, doer, observer, responder. But Jesus declared that the individual soul is valuable and the human personality is valuable. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? That's Matthew chapter 16, verse 2. So not even the entire universe is worth one soul. And the soul is the object of God's redemption plan. The Lord redeems the soul of his servants. This is Psalm 34, verse 22. Now, in negating the soul, yoga philosophy also negates love. Think about this. Not only does it negate relationship because it erases the sense of self and other, but how can you have love without self and other? You have to have one who loves and one who is beloved, right? That's subject-object duality. It's just built into love. Yoga philosophy rejects embodied existence. It denies the reality and worth of the body. Now, let me give you a really grim illustration of this. This is a painting entitled A Suicide Next to the Cemetery, and it's by the artist Chirila Corina. His last name is my first name, or my first name is his last name. Anyway, Suicide Next to the Cemetery. So yogic meditation is motivated by this contempt for the body and this aim at shuffling off this mortal coil. I'm quoting Shakespeare. You know, I always observe that when yoga practitioners talk about this, it's always in elegant terms like we're transcending the body. What they really mean is that we are dumping this delusional corpse. That's putting it in plain language. I'm going to give you some examples, some statements made by the influential Indian philosopher Shankara. not sure how to pronounce that. He lived from 788 to 820 AD, and he is very well known for his formulation of non-dual philosophy, which is the heart of yoga. Listen to what he says about the body, and this is from his Crest Jewel of Discrimination. It's translated by Swami Prabhavananda, and Christopher Isherwood. Quote, "This body, which is made up of skin, flesh, blood, arteries, veins, fat, marrow, and bone, is full of waste matter and filth. It deserves our contempt. The gross body is known to be the root of that delusion of I and mine. Detach yourself completely from this covering, the body, which is sluggish and foul. Having done this, never think of it again. To remember one's own vomit is merely disgusting." This is spirituality of the East, folks. "A cow is indifferent to the garland which is hung around her neck. The knower of Brahman is indifferent to the fate of his body." All right, so that's the end of the quotes. I'm really trying to put the needle in this balloon of, all hail to yoga, all hail to yoga. You now see what's at the center of this. By contrast, the Old and New Testaments affirm the reality and worth of embodied existence. They regard all living beings and the created order as proof of the wisdom, power, and love of a creator God. And here's a painting from the Renaissance period. We're going to talk about the body of Christ. This is called The Entombment of Christ, and it's by Caravaggio, and it was painted in 1603. So, if you deny the reality of the body and you have disdain for the body, this is going to prejudice your mind against the manifestation of God in the flesh, which is who Christ is, right? Christ is the God-man Savior, and this is a central doctrine of Judaism and Christianity. I'll just focus on one thing, which is Isaiah chapter 53. This is a prophecy about the Jewish Messiah. He's born of a virgin. His title is Emmanuel, God with us, God in the flesh. Oh, he's the God-man, and his body was pierced and wounded for our transgressions. It was crushed and bruised for our iniquities. His life blood was poured out unto death, and his soul was made an offering for sin, to remit the sins of many. So if you deny the body in general, you're going to deny the specific body of the Savior of the world. That's just how it is. All right, the denial of and the disdain for the body prejudices the mind also against the possibility of God inhabiting the body with his own spirit. We enjoy the deposit of the Holy Spirit on the inside, and that's because God deemed the body a worthwhile investment. He says that, the body is basically the temple of the Holy Spirit. So in Judaism and Christianity, the status of the body is elevated by virtue of God's humble interest in it. His humble interest in his own created work. And this is so sincere that he actually deigns to glorify himself through a human body. He says of Israel, "You are my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified." And this is Isaiah chapter 49, verse 3. And this glorification also includes resurrection of the body from the dead. And this is what Job said, "After my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God." In my flesh I shall see God. That's from Job chapter 19, verses 26 and 27. Now, our last section here would be, looks like this one's a little bit out of order. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, that's okay. Well, I'll toggle back and forth. We're going to talk about biblical meditation in contrast to yogic meditation. We've already established that yogic meditation is non-conceptual and non-relational. What about biblical meditation? The Bible exhorts us to meditate. Well, biblical meditation is conceptual and it's relational. The word meditation in the Bible always denotes mental activity and relational engagement. It always signifies the active use of the mind, kind of in an interactive, self-other context. The believer contemplates a divine object. This could be something that reveals God's nature. It could be by studying the Bible or contemplating, his law, his ways, his works, the great creation, his glory, and so on. And in the process, the believer starts to commune with God. So it's relational. Biblical meditation involves the cognitive functions of reason, memory, language, and emotional connection. Biblical meditation is dynamic. It's not static. It will survey an object from every angle. It will analyze its qualities, admire and esteem that object. We're talking about a divine object, and interact with it and be changed by it. So this is the practice of personal engagement. Now, in the Old Testament, there are about 4 words that are Hebrew words that are translated as meditate. And in the New Testament, there are 2 Greek words that are translated as meditate. And they all share this common meaning of mental activity and relational interaction. The first appearance of the word is in Genesis, and it's the Hebrew word suach. Here's the statement. Isaac went to meditate in the field in the evening, and he lifted his eyes and looked, and there the camels were coming. That's from Genesis chapter 24, verse 63. Now, notice that Isaac was not disconnected from the world, because in the middle of his meditation, he noticed that the camels were coming. He was not dissociated. Strong's Concordance defines suach as to meditate, muse pensively, commune, speak, complain. So this word has some relational qualities to it. It implies interaction either with oneself or with someone else. You get that from commune, speak, and complain. Okay, another Hebrew word that is translated as meditate is hagah. Let me see here if I got this right. Yes. This means to mutter and to murmur, either in pleasure or in anger, to groan or sigh. And this is basically a gut-level emotional response. It's kind of like raw power. It conveys a spontaneous, private, deeply personal communication coming from the core of one's being. Like that young gentleman there. He's obviously touched by something that he read from the Word. And so now what he's expressing to God is a deep, gut-level devotion. Do you see that in his body language there? Another meaning of this particular word is to go over a matter in one's mind, to ponder it deeply. And this is as when a person speaks to himself, mutters under his breath, murmuring in a low voice, as is often done by those who are musing. Here's a scriptural example. The heart of the righteous studies or ponders how to answer. That's Proverbs chapter 15, verse 28. This word also includes remembering. And so when you're meditating on God's law day and night, this suggests reciting and rehearsing God's law until it is deeply instilled as a guide to conduct. And here's an example. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe to do all that is written in it. So you shall meditate, you shall recite, rehearse, ponder, study, remember it day and night. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. That's Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. And then finally, a last example. The righteous man's delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. Psalm 1, verse 2. Okay, the final Hebrew word that is translated as meditate is siach, and this means to produce, to put forth, to bring forth, and it refers to something like shoots or buds that are germinating or flowers that are unfolding. So when you apply this to the mind, it means that you generate thoughts that are as luxuriant as plant growth. Have you ever done free association? where you write a word and then you use that as a theme and then you branch off all these other ideas that are related to a theme. It turns into kind of this firework explosion of, if you haven't done it, then the analogy is not working, but I was trying. So it means that you're kind of like sprouting all of these thoughts. It's like plant life that's luxuriant. Another meaning of this particular word siach is to ponder something, and especially to ponder a divine matter, and by implication to converse with yourself about it. And it suggests study and communing. Here's some example from the Psalms. I meditate within my heart, and my spirit makes diligent search. Psalm 77, verse 6. I will meditate on your precepts and contemplate your ways. Psalm 119, verse 15. I meditate on your wonderful works. Psalm 119, verse 27. I meditate on all your works. I muse on the work of your hands. Psalm 143, verse 5. And another one, I meditate on the glorious splendor of your majesty. Psalm 145, verse 5. Now, in the New Testament, we have two words that are translated as meditate. The first one is meletao, and it is clearly applied to the study of doctrine. And this is a great example. Till I, and this is referring to the Apostle Paul, he's speaking or writing, till I come again, give attention to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. Do not neglect the gift that is in you, which was given to you by prophecy with the laying on of hands of the eldership. Meditate on these things, give yourself entirely to them, that your progress may be evident to all. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 13 through 15. And this particular word means to attend to something carefully, to practice, to be diligent, meditate, devise, contrive. It implies using the creative imagination to envision something and using higher reasoning to plan something. And the ancient Greeks used this particular word to refer to the intellectual work of orators and rhetoricians in preparing public speeches and writing persuasive arguments. So it clearly involves critical thinking skills and higher reasoning, and that's why I used that particular diagram there, because you've got the wheels turning, the machinery of the mind is active. Jesus used this word when he advised his disciples not to premeditate a defense in a court of law. Like when you come under persecution and you wind up getting dragged to court, this is what he said. Therefore settle it in your minds not to meditate beforehand what you will answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your enemies will not be able to contradict or resist. And that's Luke chapter 21, verses 14 through 15. The final Greek word, is logizomai. This was a favorite of the Apostle Paul, and he used it 27 times in his epistles. And it means to reckon inwardly, to count up or weigh the reasons, to deliberate. And I like to compare this to Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnet when she said, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Let me count the ways. So that's what this one is like. You're taking an account. It's an accounting term. Paul's instructions on biblical meditation give you an example of this. And he's basically saying, take stock of all kinds of redemptive themes. Whatever encourages you, uplifts you, ennobles you, enriches you, meditate on those things. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate, logizomai, on these things. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. So the purpose of biblical meditation is to love God. And it actually fulfills one facet of the first commandment, which is to love the Lord with all your mind. All your mind. That's Luke chapter 10, verse 27. And all your mind refers to the full capacity of the intellect given by God. So that includes critical thinking and also creative imagination. This is the sanctified use of the intellect and the creative imagination to hallow God. Now, what is the conclusion of all of this? Yogic meditation is not a mindfulness exercise, it is an exercise in mindlessness. It's not a concentration exercise, it is the practice of detachment and dissociation. It is not a de-stress or relaxation exercise, it is the practice of spiritual suicide. And the peace that comes through yogic meditation is rest in peace. It's the peace of extinction, the absence of self. True peace comes from presence, not absence. True peace is the presence of a person. And who is that person? This is the person of God, the God-man, Christ Jesus, who is the Prince of Peace. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Okay, that concludes our discussion of yogic meditation and passive poses. You all have been sweetly attentive. We're done. I'm gonna hug you like... Did you want to stop the camera? We'll make our comments off camera. These yogis are